Hello, this is Dr. Stanley Lang. Welcome to this broadcast, and the topic is milk bad for you? Is milk bad for you? And the reason that I'm sharing on this topic today is not from a patient encounter, but from many patient encounters, and also because I saw a stupid webinar that was on this subject. And it was basically somebody that I really respect who was running the webinar, interviewing somebody that was supposedly a guru when it comes to natural health subjects. And the subject included, one of the subjects that was being discussed was whether milk was good for you or bad for you. So I hope not to step on too many toes by sharing these opinions that I have, but I felt like milk was not given a fair shake on this webinar. So I thought I would share these thoughts for those people that might be interested in what we would call the whole story. So I'm going to give some little factoids here that would put the whole question into context for people that are kind of thinking about, is milk bad for you or good for you? So first of all, the question is, how long have people been drinking milk anyway? And the answer is at least 7,000 plus years, probably longer, because domesticated cows, we think at least 10,000 years. Now, people were not domesticating cows to slaughter them. You can go out and kill cows without having them being domesticated. They were being domesticated for other reasons, and guess what the reason was? It was to make milk available to people to drink. So why would they do that? Because they perceived way back then that it was a good way to give food to themselves and to their families. So one of the things that you will notice on the internet is that there's lots of bad advice. There's lots of confusing advice, and sometimes it comes from people that are internet gurus. Sometimes it is done without malice or intent to deceive. And I've certainly said stupid things, so I understand that we can sometimes say things we didn't mean, but these things were said intentionally to mislead people into thinking that milk was bad for you. And I felt like it was done in a way that didn't give the whole story. So my point is, I want to give you what I do with medicine in general, which is informed consent. That means you get the pros and the cons, and then you get to decide what you want to do with it. So one of what I felt rather silly explanations for why we shouldn't drink milk as adults was, the argument was that, well, look around, no other adult animals like milk and drink it. And as soon as I heard that no other adult animals like milk, I was thinking of my cats and my dogs. Now, I grew up in farm country. Most people in that part of the country had cows that they milked, and they milked them for their own personal use. And if they had a lot of cows, they sold the milk too. One thing that you could be guaranteed is that cats hanging around would drink the milk if they had a chance to. But we've noticed that our dogs love to drink milk also. They'll eat it, drink it, whatever they can if they get access to it. Why is that? Because they like it. Now, if you know dogs, they will not eat everything. They might eat a lot of stuff that's not the best for them, but they definitely will turn their nose away from stuff that truly isn't good for them. And they don't turn their way, our dogs don't turn away from the milk products that we offer them, but more about that later. The point being that there are some adult animals that actually like milk, especially cats. Now, why would that be? I don't know, but I thought it was a silly thing to say on this webinar that one reason that we shouldn't be drinking milk is because no other adult animals drink it, as if that should decide what we eat or drink. So the other thing that was brought up was that this person that was complaining about milk was continuously talking about skim milk. Now, I think it's cheating to use a distorted, damaged form of milk as your example of milk. Skim milk is not milk. It's damaged milk. It's been all the fats have been extracted and the proteins have been damaged. So skim milk in no way is milk, and it is not good for you. But whole milk is good for you, which I will demonstrate in a few moments here. But first of all, the other thing that is not differentiated on that webinar is that there's a huge difference between raw milk and pasteurized milk. So a lot of people are afraid of raw milk. It's actually statistically one of the safest foods that you can consume in this country. And I'm not going to bore you with the statistics, but I've seen the calculations. And it is infinitesimal. It is so small that you would get sick from eating properly prepared in a proper farm setting, raw milk, versus other things that we get sick from all the time from buying in the grocery stores or eating out at restaurants. So raw milk versus pasteurized milk. Well, what's the truth on that? Well, the truth is that raw milk is protective for lots of different conditions. It activates our immune system in positive ways, and one of the mechanisms that we think that it happens by is that there are these little particles that are called microRNA in raw milk that haven't been damaged by the pasteurization process that signal our DNA. So there's research that has been published that looked at the effect of consuming raw milk and the risk of asthma. And guess what they found? Well, in Poland, this study, which was published in 2013, showed that children who consumed, we're talking about 2-year-old, 3-year-old children that consumed raw milk, had a lot lower risk of developing asthma than children that had not consumed raw cow's milk. And the same has been shown in studies done in the US. Children that are exposed to raw milk have a lower risk of asthma, significantly lower risk of asthma. Now, why that is, obviously we can't say why. I just gave a hypothesis that there's some significant gene signaling that's happening from the microRNA that is present in raw milk that has been damaged by the pasteurization process and essentially eliminated. So it's not only the proteins that are damaged by pasteurization, you eliminate all these other gene signals that were present in the original raw material. But not only that, the other question is whole milk versus skinny milk. So whole milk is real milk. Now, it was more real before you pasteurized it, but at least it's got the major macronutrients in it. And what happens when you compare whole milk versus skinny milk? Well, it turns out that if a child is able to consume milk fats, they will have a lower incidence of asthma versus children that are not exposed to milk fats. And that research is published also. So the problem is the skinny milk, the 2% milk, the damaged milk, the stuff that's been processed that damages the internal qualities of the milk. So even whole milk that's been pasteurized has a lot of good effects for the body. Raw milk has even more good effects, as I've indicated. But because of a lot of political and other issues, we don't have access to raw milk very easily in our country. Now, another point that I would like to make is this. The genetics themselves point to the fact that we are actually designed as adults to drink milk. Why is that? Because we have an enzyme that is called lactase. And what does lactase do? It allows us to digest lactose. Now, everybody has this enzyme when they're babies, but many adults lose it as they get older. But certain parts of the world have a high incidence of having this particular enzyme. Europeans, for instance, have a high incidence of having lactase available so that they can digest the sugar lactose. You've heard of lactose intolerance. What that means is that person has lost the ability to digest the sugar that is called lactose, which is the sugar that's in milk. Now, they've done some gene mapping to watch what has happened to the gene that allowed us to digest this sugar. And as it turns out, it started somewhere in the middle of Central Europe, and then it spread out so that more and more of Europe became able to have this genetic ability to digest the sugar that's in milk. Now, that's interesting because that's like saying this gene gave those Europeans a competitive advantage. That's why the gene spread, because it gave people a competitive advantage. Why is that? Because milk is a good food for people to consume, especially in its raw form, which is obviously what they were drinking back then. The concept of pasteurization had to be developed because of trying to bring milk into cities where there was no way to refrigerate the milk, etc. So there was a lot of issues associated with milk contamination and causing disease as the big cities grew. But in its original form, in the small farming communities, it was a competitive advantage to have the ability to digest lactase, or to digest lactose with this enzyme lactase. That alone tells us that we are meant to consume milk because we can digest it. Now, not everybody in the world can, but even parts of Africa, which supposedly is lactose intolerant, there are different pockets in Africa that have developed this ability to digest this sugar. That tells us that the potential is there. And there are tribes that actually consume milk as a staple. So again, this produces a competitive advantage for those people. A lot more could be said about that, but it's clear that everybody doesn't have the ability to digest the sugar in milk. So what about those folks? Well, lo and behold, mankind figured out a way to make milk available even to people that can't digest the sugar in milk. And these two products are called kefir and yogurt, both of which you've probably heard. Everybody's heard of yogurt. Some people haven't heard of kefir. Kefir is fermented milk. Now, what fermented milk, kefir, does in addition is that it digests the bacteria in kefir digest the protein called casein in milk. Now, when you look on the internet, you're going to find some things that say that kefir has casein in it. Well, it doesn't, because the kefir bacteria, if it's homemade, has digested all of the casein. So what this means is that for people that don't have the genetic ability to digest the sugar in milk, when it's fermented, the bacteria consume that sugar so that the person doesn't have to digest it. And in addition, if you're consuming the kefir, you don't have to worry about the casein in it either. So what happens when these little bacteria digest the casein? Well, they create all sorts of little peptides that have been shown to be antibacterial, antifungal, and they're also gene signalers, in addition to a lot of things we don't know about them yet. So kefir is a superfood. It's fermented milk, and it is one of the superfoods that I recommend for people. I recommend kefir to every adult patient that I see, and as many children as will drink it, because in this day and age, the more fermented foods and drinks that you take, the better your biome is going to be. So here we are with this bad food, milk, which is the source of making your own homemade kefir. So if you make your kefir at home, you can do what we call a double kefiring process. And double kefiring is fermenting it 2 days in a row. I'm not going to go into details on how you do it. It's simple to do, it's the point. And it eliminates 100% of the casein. So the question that some people have about casein, and whether the beta casein, which is one of the subtypes of casein, which is one of the protein groups in milk, and so there's this A1 or A2, does it matter? Well, it doesn't matter at all if you're consuming it as kefir, because it digests it all. And so you don't have to worry. If you've got a casein issue, you don't have to worry about it if you've got access to homemade kefir. Now, the problem with kefirs that are purchased in the store is that they're not fermented long enough to get rid of all the casein. They've gotten rid of most of the casein, but not 100% of it. If you do the home kefiring process and you kefir for 2 days in a row, then that will be 100% casein free. And that's not only a superfood, but for people that can't drink milk, you can still have all the benefits of the nutrients that milk brings you, by making your own kefir at home. It's simple to do. And then at the same time, you're getting some of the most powerful probiotic foods that you can consume on the face of the earth, much better than any kind of a probiotic supplement. So since we're talking about kefir, I want to just raise a sort of a side question, because a lot of people are into the ketogenic diet. What about the ketogenic diet and kefir? Well, the answer is you can consume kefir on the ketogenic diet. Now, there are a lot of people who promote the ketogenic diet that say stay away from dairy. Well, I would say don't stay away from kefir because of all the good things that are in it. And I know for sure that you can stay in ketosis continuously and consume kefir. I drink kefir twice a day and I am in continuous ketosis. No problem. Now, why is that? Because 100% of the carbs are gone. The lactose is the source of carbs in milk, and they're digested by the fermentation process, and the casein's all been digested, which for people that might have some issues with cow's milk, that is gone also. So that leaves a tiny percent of people that have a true bad milk allergy. People with mild milk allergies, I think you will notice that it goes away when you drink double kefir. There's a small percentage of people that have true milk allergy. There's some constituents in kefir that you still might react to. So I'm not going to say that 100% of people can drink kefir, because that's probably not true. But most people can, and if you can, it will benefit you in huge ways. It's one of the most powerful superfoods, as I've said. So it doesn't stop you from doing the ketogenic diet. In fact, it's a great way to add diversity to your diet. Lots of critical nutrients. Those proteins are broken down into the subgroups of these little peptides that do all sorts of fascinating things, and you get all the good bacteria. So the last thing I want to talk about that kind of tells a story why milk has to have been good for people is the old family, the family cow. You know, if you know anything about history, a family that had a cow was rich. A peasant family that had a cow was rich. A family moving west in the United States, when the West was being colonized by westward moving European and peoples of European ancestry. Some people would be, they were invading the West. I'm not here to argue the point. The point that I'm making here is that they relied on their cow for food. If you had a cow, you had insulation, and you had a barrier against starvation, because your cow could keep making milk for you as long as it had access to grass. And so people relied on their family cow. They didn't eat the cow. They used the milk to drink it, to make cheese, to make butter. And it was a critical part of families' diet. So the idea that this would be bad for us now, when for thousands of years, this has been a staple for huge chunks of the population, particularly if you have a European background, the chances are pretty good that your ancestors relied on cows for their sustenance because of the milk that they made. But there's a whole lot more I could say on this subject. I'm just touching the surface, but I want to emphasize that this information that's floating around out there, that milk is bad, and then it's misrepresented by aiming at damaged milk, which is skim milk or 2% milk, and claiming that that's milk, when the only thing that's true milk is whole milk, and the only thing that's and even better is raw whole milk. But as I said, most people don't have access to that. But at least you've got the healthy fats that are in whole milk. Now, obviously, the assumption of all this is that you're drinking organic milk, and that you're not consuming milk that has been poisoned with a bunch of hormones, and poisoned with antibiotics, and poisoned with glyphosate that is in the feed of a lot of these animals that are factory farmed animals. So if you're going to do what I've just been talking about, it's critical that you drink organic milk. Don't cut corners and drink non-organic milk. It's got way too much junk in it. And it will damage you because of the junk, not because of what the milk originally was. But that being said, the last thing I want to point out is that drinking milk, and especially drinking kefir, is a great way to have a component to a low glycemic diet, a diet that doesn't raise your blood sugar quickly. kefir is a very powerful part of low glycemic eating as I teach it to people. But even whole milk is a great way to add calories that are relatively low glycemic. Paradoxically, the fat-free dairy products are junky. The fat-free yogurts have milk solids added back into them. Those milk solids are damaged milk proteins that actually have MSG in them. So when you drink or eat dairy products, it needs to be organic and it needs to be based on whole milk, and then it's good for you. So as a bonus for sticking with me this far, I'd like to give you a book called Why Am I Still Fat? Because a lot of people who are watching this are overweight and they're wondering, why am I still carrying this overweight? They may be trying really hard. So read the book. It'll give you lots of insight as to why you might be carrying a weight around, even if you're trying really hard. So I hope you found this little passage, or this little jaunt into the milk story interesting. It's not, obviously, in a few minutes we're not covering everything, and I'm sure people that disagree with me would have about 15 things that they would say back to me. But enough said about the bad things about milk. I wanted to say some of the things that are good about milk. And I think it's incontrovertible that milk has been critical for human survival in multiple cultures for thousands of years. And it's been a big part of the European experience for thousands of years. So for those of you who have European background, this is particularly relevant to you. If you're of a different ethnic background, well, maybe not so much, but you still can benefit if you're not of European background and you don't necessarily have the genetics to digest milk. You can still drink kefir. And kefir is pretty much able to be drunk by anybody. It's a superfood. I won't go into that. It's a whole different seminar that we could talk about. I encourage you to start making your own kefir at home. Don't just settle for store-bought kefir because it's only partially fermented compared to homemade. So anyway, get the free book if you don't have it, if you haven't read it. I wish you well. God bless and have a great day.